Unlike place names, which often give us information about who once lived somewhere, street names can be a different case entirely. Sometimes they bear the names of notable and often now infamous people. Other times they refer to long-gone industries performed in the area, and you can guess what happened on Cock Lane in London, site of the Cock Lane Poltergeist in 1762. Or street names might be the last remains of a now-dead language. Yet the continual building of new streets also sees the creation of new names more fitting to the time and area. For example, Newcastle upon Tyne's Great Park development features a Sir Bobby Robson Way. Given the different ways that these street names can come about, let's explore the origins of some unusual place names in the UK and the US in this week's episode of Fabulous Folklore. Hello there and welcome to Fabulous Folklore, the podcast for all things folklore, occult and just a bit weird. I'm your host Icy Sedgwick, blogger, fantasy author and your guide into these rather mysterious realms. I've got some rare things to show you, so come on in, take a look around, but be careful not to touch anything. These things sometimes bite. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Fabulous Folklore with me, your host, Icy Sedgwick. I do hope that you're well. I do hope that this month is treating you well. It's actually my birthday next week, so that's going to be quite good. I've already planned what it is I'm going to be doing, and weather permitting, I'll be going to see the only stone circle basically in my neck of the woods, which is unusual that I've never been before. You probably didn't need to know that either, but I thought I would share it anyway. After we looked at some odd place names last week, I thought it's only right that we look at street names. I thought that I'd actually looked at a lot more street names, but I haven't. It seems the only one that I have featured so far is really Whitmer-Watmergate, although I've occasionally mentioned some in passing, like for example Blutgasse in the Vienna episode. So I've sort of dealt with street names as and when I've needed to when we've been doing the European cities, and we will be doing some more European cities later on this year as well. But anyway, let's get started. So we're going to start off with two street names from Newcastle, and the first one is actually a request, which is the reason why I've put it in. And this is Two Ball Lonnon in Fenham, and it might sound like quite an odd name, but it does actually end up with a very straightforward explanation, which was kind of disappointing, but it's also quite cool at the same time. So Two Ball Lonnon connects the A167 and A186 in the Fenham area, and despite its length of almost 1.5 kilometres, Lonnon means lane in the Geordie dialect, and obviously there is an episode about the Geordie dialect if you're more interested in that. Now, there is a photo from the entrance to the lane at the West Road end, and if you are watching this on YouTube, then I have put that on the screen right now, and if you're not, then the photo is in the blog post, which you'll find the link in the show notes. But this photo shows a stone ball atop each of the two stone gate posts, so it was literally named for these two balls at the entrance to the lane. The photo was taken in around 1905, and the two balls are now long gone, having since been taken to Whitfield Hall near Allendale. So it is an example of a really literal approach, and you get this quite a lot in Newcastle. So we have a road, for example, the West Road, so named because it goes to the west. We have the side, which goes down the side of the castle, and so on. So we do have quite a lot of literal street names, and I quite like the fact that Two Ball Lonnon was one of them. We also have Dogleap Stairs, which is not in the same category, and this particular staircase connects the Castle Garth area beside Newcastle Castle and the Black Gate beside it, and it connects it with the side which leads down to the quayside. Now, despite the name, it actually has nothing to do with jumping dogs. It actually derives from dog loop or dog lope, which means a narrow slip of ground between houses. And according to legend, when Baron Eldon, later the Lord Chancellor of England, eloped with Bessie Surtees in 1772, he supposedly rode away with her on horseback up Dogleap Stairs. I will do an episode on Bessie Surtees at some point because it's a really interesting legend. The stairs are also name-checked in the Dire Straits song Down to the Waterline from 1978, and there's also a dog bank in Newcastle. Now, that originally linked Pilgrim Street and Akenside Hill, but here the word dog is actually likely to refer to a dog leg, meaning a sharp bend or narrow passage. But I did think Dogleap Stairs was a really interesting one. And the idea of it being a narrow slip of ground between houses, it's difficult to imagine now. And again, I have put a photograph online so you can see what it looks like. But it did used to have buildings on either side, so it would have been a narrow slip of ground between houses. It's just really hard to picture that now. Now we're going to move on to St Mary's Axe, London, obviously in England. And I've always been fascinated by the street name St Mary's Axe. And if you've never heard of it, you will almost certainly have heard of one of its most famous buildings, which is the Gherkin, otherwise known as 30 St Mary Axe. So where did the name come from? Well, there was apparently a church with the same name on the west side of St Mary's Axe Street, although that was actually demolished in 1565. According to John Stowe, the church's full name was St Marie the Virgin, St Ursula and the 11,000 Virgins, but people used its common name of St Mary's Axe because apparently there was a nearby sign featuring an axe, and obviously the church was St Mary's. Bearing in mind that many signs in this period featured images rather than words due to the low literacy rates, it is possible to assume that there would be a sign with an axe on it. It's just difficult to know what business that sign was actually for. A few people have mentioned perhaps the Skinners in the area. Who knows, might be. But Henry Harben actually offered a different explanation in 1918. Yes, the church was dedicated to the 11,000 martyred virgins apparently massacred by Huns on a journey with St Ursula, but it also apparently contained one of the 3 axes used to execute them, and that explanation came from a document written in 1514. So in his explanation, the church and then thus the street were so named for the literal axe, not just a sign. So who knows, either way, you look at it and go, it's a bit of a weird street name, particularly then to have the link with the financial district, but never mind. The other one I've included from London, because it's just always fascinated me, is Little Britain, which is just south of Smithfield. It was actually originally the name of an area, so it was a whole neighbourhood, not just a street, but its original name was Little Brittany because people from Brittany, France settled there after the Norman conquest. Among others, the area was favoured by the Dukes of Brittany. Over time, as London grew, the wealthy moved west, obviously towards the likes of Mayfair and so on, and various trades moved into the vacated buildings. In Little Britain's case, it became home to booksellers, although they also abandoned it in favour of Paternoster Row and St Paul's Churchyard nearby. Many of the former mansions were subdivided into tenements, and John Milton, Samuel Johnson, Washington Irving and Benjamin Franklin all stayed in the street at some point. And obviously over time, Little Brittany eventually became Little Britain. So we're going to move out of London and we're going to move off to Oxford now, to Crotch Crescent. Now, Crotch Crescent really does sound like one of those typically smutty street names. And this is one of the problems that you have when you're looking up weird street names. A lot of the time they're either funny or rude. And I didn't really want to fall into the trap of just simply looking at the rude ones. Because A, I know the kids listen to this and I might have a bit of a giggle, but then that might make for some awkward conversations with people's parents. But I also thought I want to include ones which sound a little bit odd maybe, but actually have a really mundane explanation. And Crotch Crescent is one of these, because it actually takes its name from William Crotch, who was an 18th century music professor at Oxford. I did look into it a little bit further, and apparently the word crotch could also potentially come from the Middle English word croach, I think that's how you pronounce that, which could mean either a crook or a cross. And the word first appeared in 1539, and people think it originally referred to like a forked stick, so it could be like a forked branch of a tree or a fork in the road or something along those lines, but no, was named for an actual person, which is one of the things that you do find quite a lot of the time with slightly odd place names. You do then actually find out that it's named after a person. But there we go. And then I couldn't not include this one. This is amazing. This is Ghost House Lane in Chilwell in Nottingham, also in England. And surprisingly, given the huge fascination with all things paranormal, there is only one Ghost House Lane in the world. And apparently there's a couple of streets which are Ghost House something else in Australia, but there's only one Ghost House Lane, which I thought was phenomenal. And as someone deeply interested in the supernatural, as I think long-time listeners will know, I obviously had to investigate this one further, because it does beg the question, what is the Ghost House? Well, the ghost house of the street name actually fell to demolition in 1952 during just widespread redevelopment in the area, but the legend associated with it actually goes back to 1827. At the time, Chilwell was a farming village, and a pedlar told a customer that he would be staying at a farmhouse in the village. This farmhouse was Ashflat House, and it seems the pedlar wanted to marry one of the 3 daughters of the Bagley family who lived in the farmhouse, suggesting he must have been relatively well off, because for some reason this was seen as actually an advantageous match on the part of the family as well. So despite the fact he's referred to as a pedlar, must have had some money. Basically, one website described them as being like a travelling salesman, is one way of looking at them. Now, the pedlar, sometimes named as McQuince in some sources, left his penultimate customer of the day to head to Ashflat House, but he was never seen again. His customers in Chilwell and Beeston owed him money, but no one ever came to collect it. A year later, the Bagley family who lived in Ashflat House seemed a lot more wealthy than they'd been earlier. The house boasted new furniture, and the family's 3 daughters all wore much nicer clothes, and they'd also bought pigs. 10 years after McQuince's disappearance, however, their landlord kicked the Bagley family out of Ashflat House. And that winter, the Chilwell ghost legend began in earnest. People could hear bangs at night as though someone was throwing things at the shutters. Apparently the landlord was so confused what was going on, he actually put paper across the shutters, thinking, oh, if someone's throwing something, it'll then tear the paper, and people could still hear the bangs, but the paper remained completely intact. So it's very, very strange. There was one day there was a really heavy fall of snow, but there was no footprints anywhere near the house in the snow. The house would shake, but nobody who kept watch could see why. Some suggested it was the ghost of McQuince, and then that's why Ashflat House became known as the Ghost House, but his body was never found during the redevelopment of the area, so no one really knows what happened to him. So even though the Ghost House is no longer there, the story is preserved through Ghost House Lane. Isn't that cool? Honestly, I've chuffed a bit I found a ghost story, but never mind. We're going to move on to the Philog in Cardiff, Wales, and obviously there's an entire episode about Cardiff. Now, while there can be quite a tendency in investigations like this to look for innuendo or funny names, I do think sometimes the ones that are just a bit baffling are also really worth looking into. And the Philog, which leads into Whitchurch Common in Cardiff, is one such name. And the name originally applied to an old thatched house on the street, but that doesn't really get us into what it actually means. So, Reem Ahmed notes that the PH at the beginning of Philog is the anglicised version of FF in Welsh. Following that, the Philog might be an anglicised version of Philog, an Old Welsh word which can mean a young mare or filly, or a wing or a spoke of a wheel. So from that, we might deduce that the old thatched house had a stable and maybe they owned a single filly. But even better for our purposes, Edgar L. Chappell suggested in his book Old Whitchurch, The Story of a Glamorgan Parish, that the name related to the Ceffyl Dŵr, the Welsh water horse. In various folk tales, they're sort of similar to the Scottish Kelpie or the Irish Eag Uska, and they're lighted by waterfalls and pools, and when a human decided to ride one, they might actually fly into the sky where they evaporated, with their rider then plummeting to their death. But unlike the Kelpie or the Eag Uska, in some legends, the only people who can ride them safely are actually clergymen, and sometimes they would get to their destination being like, "By that was a fast horse," and then the horse would have vanished, which I think is quite an interesting way of looking at the Ceffyl Dŵr. Now, according to Chappell, the Ceffyl Dŵr once loitered by the Taff near Whitchurch Common. So I quite like the fact that there was a possible link through this spectral horse of Welsh folklore behind this particular place name. So I thought that was very cool. And then I wanted to include a really cute one as well. And this one, I absolutely love this. And this is Goose Dubs in Glasgow in Scotland. And you'll find Goose Dubs in the city centre, which is all that remains of an 18th century lane. Now, originally a mansion once stood in the area, which was home to the Provost of Glasgow, John Aird, in the early 1700s. And it's a really straightforward story, but it is really sweet as a mental image. But Aird kept geese who enjoyed splashing about in the puddles in the nearby lane. So as puddles were known as dubs, so the lane became Goose Dubs, as in geese in the puddles, which I just thought was really sweet. So I wanted to have quite a cute one there as well. And now we're going to have a look at the American ones, and nobody does street names like America. I'm sorry, these are absolutely tremendous. Again, there's so many to choose from, so I've just picked some of the more odd ones. But the first one I want to have a look at is Candy Cane Lane, which is in Santa Claus, Indiana. And obviously we looked at Santa Claus, Indiana for place names last week, but it does turn out obviously that the street names kind of follow the same seasonal theme. Now, on one hand, they've got like a Good Friday Boulevard, a Valentine Day Drive, and even an Ides of March Drive. And I'm like, the Ides of March is not necessarily a day that you want to celebrate, but whatever. They've even got an Inauguration Day Drive as well, which is quite interesting. But they've also got a whole host of Christmas-themed street names as well. So they've got Candy Cane Lane, Mistletoe Drive, Sleigh Bell Drive. They've got streets named after Santa's reindeer. And there's even a nod to the Three Kings with Balthazar Drive, Casper Drive and Melchior Drive. So I thought, while I focused on Candy Cane Lane just because it sounds like the sweetest street in the world, I like the fact that actually they've just got a whole raft of unusual and cool street names that are related to either Christmas or seasonal things as well. Not so our next one, which is Bucket of Blood Street in Holbrook, Arizona. And you might remember way back when I did the pub names one, there was actually a pub called the Bucket of Blood, so bear that in mind here. But according to legend, this particular street got its name following a gunfight in Terrell's Cottage Saloon in the 1880s. It seems it started because of either a card game that went wrong or an argument between rival cowboy gangs. The stories do differ. But either way, the gunfight got so violent that passers-by described the saloon afterwards as looking as though someone had thrown a bucket of blood inside. A different version of events actually explained that the saloon was renamed in 1891 following a double murder. Either way, Terrell's renamed itself the Bucket of Blood Saloon to capitalise on the story. Now, while the saloon is long gone, because the town is on the old Route 66, which obviously unfortunately fell prey to a change in traffic patterns, the street name does remain. So if you do find yourself on Route 66, try going through Holbrook and see if you can actually find Bucket of Blood Street. We also have Chicken Dinner Road in Caldwell, Idaho, and according to the legend behind this one, Morris and Laura Lamb were friends with former Idaho Governor C. Ben Ross in the 1930s. One day while Ross was still governor, Laura invited him and his wife Edna for dinner at her house on Lane 12, and it seems Laura was famous for her fried chicken dinners. Now, over dinner, she brought up the incredibly sorry state of Lane 12 to Ross, and he made her a deal. If she got it graded and gravelled, he would get it oiled and they'd have a decent road. Laura upheld her end of the bargain, so Ross upheld his, and they got a nice shiny new road out of it. Someone in the neighbourhood was apparently less than impressed and painted Lamb's Chicken Dinner Avenue along the road surface, and the name then stuck. So it is quite an interesting one that Chicken Dinner Road sounds a bit odd, but it does basically come from the fact that someone actually took the initiative to get the road fixed over a chicken dinner, which I thought was quite interesting. And the last one, I just love this one, and this is Liquid Laughter Lane in Columbia, Maryland. And Columbia apparently has a range of really weird street names, but the reasoning behind them is actually sound, because the town's developer had made a deal with the post office that they wouldn't reuse street names that had been used in Baltimore City, Baltimore County, or Anne Arundel County. Now, the only problem was that they now needed to find 1,000 brand new names for streets in a very short period of time. So they obviously went for obvious things like flowers and animals and trees and so on, but then they also went for like random concepts as well, so which is why you've got streets like Liquid Laughter Lane, Crazy Quilt Court and Painted Yellow Gate. And I just thought again that they all sound like really magical places to live, and I just thought, isn't it really cool when someone's quite inventive with things like this? But as always, I would love to know what strange street names there are in your neighbourhood. Where I am, they're not particularly weird at all. There's actually really sound logic behind them, as you would expect from a 1970s housing estate. But obviously there are other odd names elsewhere, like obviously Dogleap Stairs and Tilbor Lunnon. But I would love to know if you've heard any similar stories about the street names where you are. Perhaps you live on a really weird street, or you've also lived on one in the past. It would be really interesting to see what names recur, and if you find the same weird place name in more than one place, that would be quite interesting. But obviously it would be quite cool to see what folklore has become attached to various street names. Even the street names that are from a much more recent period can sometimes have stories behind them as well. So for example, I mentioned Sir Bobby Robson Way at the beginning, and that largely comes from the absolute stature of Sir Bobby Robson as one of the former managers of Newcastle United. So you can't really understand Sir Bobby Robson Way without engaging with the sporting history of the city and so on. So like I say, even if you've got one that's relatively new, you do end up having to have a look at the history of the place as well. Obviously, we've also got ones like Shot Factory Lane, because they used to make shot in a factory there and so on. So sometimes they're quite straightforward to work out what they mean. Other times you need to do a little bit of digging, and then sometimes they're just plain odd. And I'd quite like to hear the just plain odd ones, if I'm completely honest. So please feel free to leave a comment in any of the usual places. All of the links are in the show notes if you want to leave something on the blog post, or you want to message me on social media. Or again, if you listen on YouTube, just whack the comment below, and that's probably the easiest way. Next week, I think we're doing pub names again. I did obviously mention the Bucket of Blood one earlier, so I thought pub names are always quite fun because some of them are just truly, truly odd. So again, if you've got one near you that you'd like to know where it came from, please do feel free to let me know. Otherwise, I'll just have a look and see what particularly strange ones I can come across. But anyway, as always, it has been marvellous chatting to you, and I will see you next week when we chat about the folklore of strange pub names. Cheerio. Well, thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, feel free to leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, because that helps other people find the show too. It also takes between 4 and 6 hours to research, write, record and edit these episodes, so if you want to help support my time in doing that, then you can buy me a coffee. or you can join the Fabulous Folklore family on Patreon and enjoy extra benefits, including exclusive episodes and articles and even illustrated talks. All the links you need are below, and thanks in advance.